Human brain is one of the most remarkable machines in existence. It has built civilizations, painted masterpieces, written poetry, created science, and explored the cosmos. And yet, despite this astonishing intelligence, we constantly make bad decisions. We procrastinate when we should act. We spend money we don't have. We overeat when we're already full. We choose short-term pleasure over long-term well-being. The paradox of human decision-making is that even though we are aware of what is good for us, we so often end up doing the opposite. Why is it that the very organ that allows us to think, plan, and reason also traps us into mistakes, biases, and irrational choices? To understand this, we have to step inside the fascinating psychology of decision-making. Every day, we make thousands of decisions, most of them without noticing. Who's of them without noticing? What shirt to wear, which route to take, what to eat for breakfast, whether to check our phone or not, whether to reply to a message immediately or later. Our lives are built on decisions both big and small, and these choices accumulate into the direction of our lives. The very process of deciding is rarely as rational and straightforward as we imagine. We like to think of ourselves as logical agents, carefully weighing pros and cons, analyzing risks, and then selecting the best option. In truth, the human brain has evolved under pressures that favored speed over accuracy, emotional shortcuts over deep rationality, and survival instincts over logical optimization. The result is a decision-making system that works most of the time, but also leaves us vulnerable to errors. One of the core reasons we make bad choices is because of something called cognitive biases. A cognitive bias is a systematic pattern of deviation from rational judgment. Instead of objectively assessing information, our brains rely on shortcuts known as heuristics. These heuristics are mental rules of thumb that save time and energy, but they often lead us astray. For example, think about how people judge the likelihood of events. If you recently saw a plane crash on the news, you might overestimate the danger of flying, even though statistically flying remains one of the safest forms of travel. This is called the availability heuristic, our tendency to judge probabilities based on how easily examples come to mind. Because dramatic, emotional, or recent events are more memorable, they distort our perception of reality. Another bias that influences bad choices is confirmation bias. Once we have an opinion or belief, we naturally seek information that supports it and ignore or dismiss information that contradicts it. Imagine you strongly believe that a particular diet works. You likely notice and remember success stories while disregarding scientific studies or personal accounts where the diet failed. This bias can be dangerous because it locks us into narrow perspectives, preventing us from making well-rounded, evidence-based decisions. Confirmation bias explains why people get trapped in echo chambers, why conspiracy theories thrive, and why we often stick to poor choices long after they've proven harmful. Loss aversion is another powerful psychological factor. Humans feel the pain of losing something much more strongly than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. If you win $100, you feel good. But if you lose $100, the emotional pain is nearly twice as intense. This asymmetry in emotional weight drives many irrational behaviors. People hold on to losing investments longer than they should because selling would mean accepting the loss. Gamblers keep betting to chase their losses, despite the odds being against them. Relationships linger past their expiration point because leaving feels like losing the time and effort invested, a phenomenon known as the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is especially revealing of how our decisions are not always about the future, but about justifying the past. Rationally, when making a choice, the past should not matter. If a movie is terrible halfway through, the logical decision is to stop watching. But many people continue watching because they already are paid with their time or money. This attachment to sunk costs makes us double down on bad choices instead of cutting our losses. It explains why businesses throw more money into failing projects and why individuals sometimes stay stuck in dead-end paths. Emotions play a critical role in decision-making as well. Far from being purely rational creatures, we are guided heavily by our feelings. Antonio Damasio, a neuroscientist, showed that people with damage to emotional parts of their brain struggled to make even the simplest decisions. Without feelings, they could list pros and cons endlessly but never reach a conclusion. Emotions give our decisions weight, urgency, and meaning. The problem arises when emotions override reason. Fear, anger, envy, or desire can push us into rash choices. Think about impulse buying. You don't need the shiny new gadget, but excitement takes over and your rational brain justifies the purchase afterward. Or consider decisions made in anger, which often lead to words or actions we regret later. Another source of bad decisions is our tendency to discount the future. Psychologists call this present bias. We place disproportionate value on immediate rewards over long-term benefits. This is why people choose junk food over healthy meals, smoking over abstinence, scrolling social media instead of working, or spending instead of saving. The long-term consequences may be obvious, but they feel distant and abstract compared to the immediate pleasure or relief. The famous marshmallow test with children showed how difficult it is for humans, even at a young age, to delay gratification. And in adult life, this tendency explains everything from credit card debt to procrastination to unhealthy lifestyles. Social influence also plays a powerful role. Humans are social animals, and our decisions are often shaped not by pure logic, but by what others are doing. Conformity experiments, such as Solomon Ash's line judgment studies, revealed that people will often choose the wrong answer just to align with the group. This drive to fit in can lead to poor decisions, from peer pressure in adolescence to herd behavior in financial markets. When everyone is buying into a housing bubble, few stop to think rationally about the risks. When everyone around us adopts a bad habit, it becomes normalized and harder to resist. Overconfidence is yet another culprit. We consistently overestimate our knowledge, abilities, and the accuracy of our predictions. This optimism bias can be helpful in giving us confidence to act, but it also blinds us to risks. Studies show that most drivers rate themselves as above average, which is statistically impossible. Investors believe they can time the market better than others, even though data shows that consistent outperformance is rare. This overconfidence fuels risky decisions, poor planning, and resistance to expert advice. The sheer complexity of the modern world also contributes to poor choices. Our brains evolved in environments where choices were limited and survival was the main concern. Should I eat this plant or not? Should I run from this predator or stay still? In today's world, we face overwhelming options, hundreds of career paths, thousands of products, endless streams of information. This abundance of choice, rather than empowering us, often leads to decision fatigue and paralysis. Psychologist Barry Schwartz called this the paradox of choice. Too many options make us anxious, dissatisfied, and prone to regret. After making a decision, we ruminate about whether we could have chosen better, which reduces satisfaction even when the choice itself wasn't bad. Another important factor is mental shortcuts in risk assessment. Humans are notoriously poor at evaluating probabilities. We worry more about rare but vivid dangers like shark attacks than about common but mundane risks like heart disease. This mismatch leads to misplaced fears and irrational choices. Politicians and marketers exploit this by framing information in emotional ways. The framing effect shows that the same data can lead to different decisions depending on how it's presented. People are more likely to choose a medical treatment if told it has a 90% survival rate rather than a 10% mortality rate, even though both statements describe the same reality. Time pressure and stress further degrade our decision-making abilities. Under pressure, we rely more on gut instincts and less on careful reasoning. While intuition can sometimes be accurate, especially in areas of expertise, it also leads to errors when situations are novel or complex. Stress narrows our attention, making us focus on immediate threats while ignoring broader context. This survival mechanism helped our ancestors, but in modern contexts like business, education, or personal finance, it often backfires. Bad decisions also stem from identity and ego. We want to protect our self-image and pride, which makes it hard to admit mistakes or change direction. Once we've declared a choice publicly, we resist altering it because we fear looking inconsistent. This phenomenon, known as commitment and consistency bias, leads us to stick with wrong decisions simply to appear steadfast. Politicians, for example, often double down on bad policies to avoid seeming weak or indecisive. the environment around us also matters more than we realize. Subtle cues, defaults, and nudges can dramatically shape our decisions. Behavioral economists have shown that when people are automatically enrolled in retirement savings programs but given the option to opt out, participation rates skyrocket compared to systems where people have to opt in. The difference is not rational deliberation, but the power of defaults. Similarly, the design of menus, apps, and stores can push us toward impulsive or unhealthy decisions. Companies are well aware of these psychological levers and use them to their advantage. The human brain itself is wired with two systems of thinking, often called System 1 and System 2, as described by Daniel Kahneman. System 1 is fast, intuitive, emotional, and automatic. It's what makes you instantly recognize a friend's face or dodge a ball flying toward you. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical, and effortful. It's what you use to solve a math problem or carefully plan a project. Most of the time, we rely on System 1 because it's efficient and effortless. But System 1 is also where most biases and errors creep in. System 2 can correct those mistakes, but it requires energy and attention, which are limited resources. Because we're often tired, distracted, or overloaded, we let System 1 dominate, leading to poor decisions. Even our biology plays a role. Neurotransmitters like dopamine drive reward-seeking behavior, pushing us toward actions that bring pleasure or novelty, sometimes at the expense of long-term benefits. Hormones like cortisol and adrenaline shape our responses under stress. Sleep deprivation impairs judgment and self-control, making us more likely to give in to temptation or react impulsively. Hunger has been shown to influence decisions in courtrooms and negotiations, as judges and juries become harsher before lunch breaks. Our decision-making, then, is not just a matter of willpower or rationality, but also of biology, context, and timing. So why do we make bad choices? The answer is that our decision-making system evolved to help us survive, not to maximize rationality in a modern, complex world. The same shortcuts and emotional drives that once kept us alive now collide with environments full of temptations, endless options, and manipulative influences. But understanding these mechanisms is the first step toward improvement. By learning about biases, we can pause and question whether our intuition might be misleading us. By recognizing the pull of loss aversion or sunk costs, we can practice cutting losses earlier. By setting up environments that nudge us toward better defaults, we can reduce the burden on willpower. And that's why. Awareness alone doesn't eliminate bad choices, but it does provide a shield against them. When you know that your brain will exaggerate the risk of rare but dramatic events, you can look at the statistics before panicking. When you realize your desire to continue a failing project comes from sunk cost bias, you can consciously decide to let go. When you notice confirmation bias pulling you into one-sided information, you can seek out opposing views. The more we understand our mental traps, the more we can design strategies to overcome them. In the end, making good decisions consistently is less about having perfect rationality and more about creating systems, habits, and environments that compensate for our flaws. Setting up automatic savings, planning meals in advance, limiting exposure to temptations, seeking feedback from diverse perspectives, and taking breaks to avoid fatigue are all practical ways to safeguard decision-making. We can't erase our biases, but we can work around them. Life will always involve uncertainty, trade-offs, and mistakes. Bad choices are part of being human. But psychology shows us that those choices are not random. They follow predictable patterns rooted in our minds. And by learning to recognize those patterns, we can reduce their grip and increase the chances of making decisions that truly serve us in the long run. The brain, that often betrays us, can also be trained to guide us better. It is, after all, the same organ that discovered these truths in the first place.